I want to talk to you today about, well, a serious problem.
More than a dozen workers told us they labour 75 hours a week.
It relates to clothing.
Is it your company's view that there is forced labour in Xinjiang?
To put it frankly, I have nothing to wear. It's spring and I just want something pretty to put on, something that makes me feel like a flower princess.
For a company that sells £1 billion to UK consumers, the committee has been pretty horrified by the lack of evidence that you have provided.
I arrived in London with a suitcase of winter woolens and Bartholomew, and there wasn't much room to pack a spring-summer wardrobe. I'm unemployed and I don't want to spend money when none is coming in. Oh, see, I love this. It's so cute, but it's giving like Ice Princess, and I want to be giving more Sunshine Barbie.
I think it would be unthinkable if we were to allow them to register in the stock exchange.
This is a big deal because it puts me in an ethical dilemma.
We are keen as a committee to see much more ambitious policy.
If only there was a place, some website where I could go and buy a whole heap of clothes for basically nothing. Shein. That magical website where you can buy a whole ass outfit for mere pounds at the click of a button. You've got tops, you've got bottoms, you've got formal wear, menswear, racism core, cottage core. Honestly, I would wear this, it's cute for spring. But would I buy it? Probably not. And not just because I'm desperately trying to save money. I don't want to line the pockets of a company that I keep hearing is built off really dodgy labour practices. Would you buy it? Even if your tastes are a bit fancier than Shein, you'd still be complicit in any human rights violation if you invest in the company. And you're probably going to have the chance to do so really soon because Shein is gearing up to list on the London Stock Exchange and it's been given preliminary approval. The valuation for this listing would be massive. We're talking in the tens of billions. So if you're into fashion or if you're into finance, listen up. It's like in a really bad romance movie where bad boy Shein looks like he's finally going to get together with good girl UK.
So tired of being good.
You've made me the happiest juvenile delinquent in Baltimore.
Or are they? It's not quite over yet. An unexpected third party has come out of the woods to derail this romance. So more on that later. Shein was absolutely roasted at the start of the year by a parliamentary committee for its bizarre refusal to answer even really basic questions about its supply chain and possible forced labour, a type of modern slavery. So if I wasn't suspicious before, I am now. Meanwhile, it's just been the 10-year anniversary of the Modern Slavery Act, so Parliament was full of chat about that. I'll talk you through that bizarre Shein hearing, a few documents, accusations and denials, see what Parliament had to say, and see if we can answer the question, is Shein using modern slavery?
Could you just tell us, do you source cotton from China?
So Shein is a company originated and developed in China, leveraging the Chinese supply chain. We have since grown into a global business with presence in over 150 countries.
But do you source cotton from China today?
So our suppliers, we do not obviously own any manufacturing facilities. Mm-hmm. We work with a wide network of suppliers. Our contract manufacturers, we have manufacturers in China, in Brazil, in Turkey, and we're obviously looking at the other potential supply chain.
In the products that you ship, there is cotton from China?
Like I mentioned, the suppliers we work with, they are based in China, in Turkey, and Brazil. Yeah. And obviously, many of them are in China.
Okay, this isn't a trick question, it's not a complicated question. In the products that you ship, will there be cotton from China?
So the suppliers we work with, most of them, they're based in regions...
It's actually a yes or no question, actually. Do you think that there is cotton from China in the products that you ship? Yes or no?
She so almost said yes. But then she remembered that the cameras were on.
You can't tell the committee today whether there is cotton from China in the products that you sell.
As mentioned, Chair, with all due respect, for detailed operational information and other aspects I'm not able to assist, I will have to write back to the committee afterwards.
It's not exactly detailed, though.
Okay. You can't tell me definitively
God.
today whether the products that you sell contains any cotton from Xinjiang.
Thank you again for your patience. I am gonna apologize for having to repeat again. If you would allow me, we'll write to the committee afterwards.
Okay. Is it your company's view that there is forced labour in Xinjiang in China?
I'm only able to answer the questions that are relating to our business.
Xinjiang is an area of China that produces a lot of cotton and also apparently produces a lot of human rights violations. We'll talk about that in a bit. I notice how she just keeps saying, oh, we'll write back about it. She doesn't want to say too much on camera. People like me and my 0 subscribers are watching.
You cannot tell me whether Shein fears there is forced labour in Xinjiang.
As mentioned, I don't think it's our place to comment on just having a geopolitical debate. My responsibility
geopolitical
here...
debate, it's a question of fact. In your 140-point checklist, do you prohibit your suppliers from sourcing cotton in Xinjiang?
Chair, and as I don't directly work on the audit, whilst I understand your question, I understand the importance of the work of the committee, I'm going to have to ask for permission to write back to you on this.
Okay. It is said that you may be seeking to list on the London Stock Exchange. Is that true?
Again, I'm not able to comment on any IPO speculation. It's not...
Okay. Why did you cease work on seeking a listing on the New York Stock Exchange?
I'm not able to comment.
Have you seen that letter and dossier from Lee Day, and would you like to take the opportunity to respond to its contents?
The dossier was by a company representing Stop Uyghur Genocide and apparently detailed extensively the situation going on there now, but I haven't been able to find a copy of it myself. I don't think it's publicly available, sadly.
Thank you for the question. I have received the letter and the materials attached to the letter. We take these type of issues that are raised or concerns raised very seriously, so we have reviewed them in full. Whilst the content of the materials are about international supply chain risks in general, it's not specifically relating to the Shein business. We have obviously reviewed it. We, as I mentioned a little earlier, the key principle is that we comply with the laws and regulations in all the countries that we operate in. As you kindly mentioned, because we operate in the UK, we indeed comply with the UK laws as well.
You know how I mentioned that I was looking for a job? Well, I think I'd be a great Shein comms advisor. I've got the strategy down pat. So basically you say, that's a really important issue. But A, it's not our problem, it's our suppliers, for example. Or B, it's actually not that important anyway. We're complying with UK's laws. Oh, and of course, C, 4, I don't know, whatever I'm up to. We will write back to you about it.
So I'll move on. In the latest Sustainability and Social Impact Report, you reported 2 cases of child labour in your supply chain. How confident are you that your supply chain is child labour free?
Thank you. It's a very, very important question, and indeed it's a very serious issue. So with respect to those, well, I guess it's not just about those 2 suppliers, it's about preventing child labour in the supply chain in general. First of all, I think it's important to stress that not only we work with the suppliers to prevent that and take remediation actions, we've also tightened the policy. So previously, the policy was on immediate remediation violations, but now child labour since October 2023 is one of the immediate termination violations. Not only that, we have programs in place to help to educate the supplier. The standards in our policy is 16 years old, which is higher than the International Labour Organization.
That was actually a really comprehensive answer, and it just goes to show that if she does have something that she wants to answer, then she can answer. So the rest of this blocking, it's just really sus.
Supply chain due diligence is not, at the moment, in many countries, a mandatory obligation. What we do is trying to already meet high international standards, and we voluntarily carry out these regular audits and this level of supply chain due diligence.
I mean, that's an indictment of international standards, not a vindication of how great you are.
How many hours a week do you think is an appropriate number for a shop floor worker at a supplier for Shein?
I don't think it's for me to judge what's appropriate. What we're saying is
you are the general counsel for Europe, the Middle East, and the whole of Africa. So I probably would say it probably is appropriate in your elevated senior position within the organisation to make comment on what an appropriate. Would you say 50 hours a week is?
I think in different countries there are different maximum hour and rest period and so on, detailed provisions, and the laws do vary in different countries, and there are also International Labour Organization standards. So what we require the suppliers to do is to comply with our code of conduct and policies, and also to ensure they comply with the local laws as applicable.
So in 2022, a Channel 4 investigation found that a manufacturer being used by Shein in China had employees working 18-hour days with 1 day off a month. And in May of last year, a BBC report, a fresh report, found that some workers were still working 75 hours a week. Is that appropriate? And do you think those two specific instances agree with your supplier code of conduct?
I don't recognise the specifics of those what you just described. As mentioned, the working hours and the overtime and the rest, those are all set out as requirements for the suppliers to adhere to, and it's definitely part of what's being audited.
For a company that sells £1 billion to UK consumers, and for a company which is seeking to float on the London Stock Exchange, the committee has been pretty horrified by the lack of evidence that you have provided today. You've given us almost zero confidence in the integrity of your supply chains. You can't even tell us what your products are made from. You can't tell us much about the conditions which workers have to work in. And the reluctance to answer basic questions has frankly bordered on contempt of the committee. So I hope that we can bring some clarity to this matter as quickly as we can through follow-up correspondence. But for now, this concludes this panel. Order, order.
So I'm sensing a bit of litigation in the wind because the advocacy group Stop Uyghur Genocide already said that if the Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA, went ahead and greenlit Shein, then it was going to launch a judicial review with the High Court to try and stop it.
Hands off, crybaby. You could have fooled me, square.
It was going to argue that the FCA had failed its integrity requirement and that Shein was breaching the Proceeds of Crime Act and the Modern Slavery Act. I want to touch on the Modern Slavery Act for a moment because it's the big one, and its focus is mainly domestic, but it sort of touches a little bit on supply chains. Let's be for real though, fair trade is optional to the extent that it's like a marketing point. This cup of tea and the tea in it could be made with modern slavery for all I know. I like my legislation how I like my tea, weak and easy to dunk. It does have this Section 54 statement, which is if you're a company earning a certain amount, millions of pounds per year, then you need to produce a statement saying what you're doing to keep modern slavery and human trafficking out of your supply chain. But it's not exactly stringent. You would be compliant if you just said, oh, we're doing nothing. Okay, thanks, bye.
You just look square. Underneath it all, I think you're really hip.
I'm not the only one dunking on this. Modern Slavery International has criticised it. It's said that it needs to reform because the UK is at risk of becoming a dumping ground for goods produced with slave labour. It says stuff like we need to empower authorities to investigate and determine if things are being made with slave labour. We need to get factories to disclose their supply chains. I love that one. Like, it could be pretty difficult, sure, but I think it's super important to at least make some improvement. And of course, Parliament has criticised this, or more specifically, a committee within the House of Lords has criticised this. They produced a report, the Modern Slavery Act 2015, Becoming World Leading Again, or to throw some glitter on it so that it catches your attention, I'm going to call it the Sparkle Report. In the Sparkle Report, they said stuff like, how about those Section 54 statements have to cover stipulated things? How about the UK bans imports not from specific countries? We're not trying to torpedo international relations, but just imports from companies that we know are dodgy. How about actually using the power of injunction to force compliance, literally ever? They reiterated that the UK risks becoming a dumping ground for tainted products that don't meet the standards of other countries. And in December last year, the government responded and essentially just said, we're looking into it. Just recently it was the 10-year anniversary of the Modern Slavery Act, so again this became a topic in Parliament, and there was a wee update on the Sparkle report, but I'm saving that for later. It is your dessert, because first we need to chew through the meat of the concerns about Shein. Now, the committee didn't just pick the Xinjiang issue up out of nowhere. It's something that the West has been giving China the side-eye about for years. So a quick rundown of the situation. Xinjiang is China's largest province. It's in the west of the country, and it is home to the Muslim Uyghur people and other Turkic Muslims. And there's a separatist movement there. It wasn't always part of China, but China isn't about to give up such a valuable piece of land. It encouraged Han Chinese to move there, and some Uyghurs started committing active terrorism. In 2014, there was a street attack in which 43 people were killed, and around that time is when China retaliated with its Strike Hard Against Violent Terrorism campaign. So what did this campaign involve? Allegedly, mass arbitrary incarceration, a clampdown on religious freedom, forced assimilation, forced labour in factories in Xinjiang and in other regions, as well as in the cotton fields that Xinjiang is famous for. It also allegedly involved forced sterilisation. And a really creepy statistic, I think, is that the birth rate in Xinjiang halved between 2017 and 2019. China said that's just because Uyghur women are all emancipated now. But you have to wonder, did they go boss their way into a human rights violation? Because that is a massive drop. There was also the Xinjiang police files leak, which gave damning details about the incarceration program. The UN has been critical of this. In 2022, it dropped a report saying that over 1 million Uyghurs could be being detained. It described multiple human rights abuses and possible crimes against humanity. The US has gone further and dubbed it genocide. China denies all this. It says that it is a despicable plot to destabilize Xinjiang and weaken China. It says that the Xinjiang police files were fake, and it says that it's actually protecting human rights by creating a more unified country with better employment. It says that those camps are vocational education and training centres based on rigorous legal oversight, focusing on psychological correction and de-radicalisation, which sounds not exactly like a health spa. It basically ends the report with a clap back at America saying, oh, you want to talk about human rights? Hey, America. How have your indigenous population fared? And what about Muslims?
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. We think the price is worth it.
Have they ever suffered at the hands of Uncle Sam? I appreciate the sass, but also don't change the subject. It is hard to know how the situation stands now. Media coverage has really dropped off on this issue, and China says that those camps are now closed anyway. I think it's important to note, though, that the allegations of forced labour were never solely contingent on the camps. Because of all that, cotton from Xinjiang is seen as a red flag. But here's the thing, it accounts for 80% of Chinese production and 20% of global supply. So you probably already own some. Now, the United States came down really hard on this. We saw that they wouldn't let Shein list on the stock exchange there. And in 2021, they passed the Uyghur Forced Labour Prevention Act, which basically said no Xinjiang cotton in the good old US of A. Problem solved? Perhaps not quite. Some random cotton clothes were tested last year to see what percent came from Xinjiang. And guess what the percentage was? Remember, 20% of global supply. 19% originated with Xinjiang cotton. And that just goes to show that words on paper don't always reflect reality. Annoyingly, the brands they tested weren't disclosed, so we don't know which ones they are. But we do have a better idea about Shein. Shein was caught in Wall Street at this time, so it was really hustling to get the US on side. Isotopic testing of US-bound Shein goods in 2023 found less than 2% from Xinjiang, and in 2024 it was 1.3%. So their policy is very little Xinjiang cotton in the United States, allowing for a small margin. However, that doesn't tell us about the United Kingdom. Xian's lawyer was very mysterious about that. My hunch would be that if there's no policy that she can cite for the UK, it's because none exists. So after Shein stonewalled the committee about the Xinjiang cotton question, the committee then wrote to Shein, who responded with a letter about the situation in the United States. The committee then got back saying, I can't believe we have to point this out, but we were actually talking about the context of the United Kingdom. Did you notice that we were in Westminster? Millions of tourists aren't flocking to New York City to look at Big Ben. Anyway, Shein then provided their long-awaited response, and guess what they said? They said there are no legal restrictions on the geographical origins of cotton products sold in the United Kingdom. Okay, the committee wasn't asking about the law, it was asking about your company policy, but we'll take it that there is none. Shein then goes on to say, however, most of the products sold in the United Kingdom will be the same as those sold in the United States, which implies that there will be very little Xinjiang cotton used in cotton products sold in the United Kingdom. Let me just run a very unscientific test. Okay, we've got this product here, and jumping across, there's the US site, and same product number. Okay, this sounds like fair comment from Shein, but I don't think that we can just give them an automatic free pass. The Sparkle report literally warned of a split system whereby companies might send their clean products to countries with strong legislation, such as the United States, and the UK would become a dumping ground for the rest. I don't think that a two-tier cotton sourcing system, including on identical products, is at all beyond the realms of possibility. And what I find especially rings the alarm bells is Trump's new eye-watering tariffs on China in conjunction with the end of the US de minimis rule. That's the rule where if you had a package $800 or less in value, it would be tax-free. So those two factors combined could well mean that the United States is much less of a market for Shein going into the future, in which case they're hardly likely to build their whole global policy around the United States no Xinjiang cotton rule. If the United Kingdom is serious about this, it needs to test the products in the United Kingdom, it needs to create legislation and enforce legislation of its own. Remember Shein's lawyer being grilled about those 2 cases of child labour found in 2023? Well, in 2024, the new stats came out and in Shein's response letters, and they said around 4,300 workplace audits had been carried out, covering more than 300,000 workers, which is a lot. Place your bets about how many under-16s were caught. Again, 2, a 15-year-old and an 11-year-old. That's not actually many, assuming that they weren't fudged. More interesting in the responses, I thought, was that you see this potential to fall through the cracks. Shein said that most but not all of its auditors are independent, and that auditing isn't actually universal, especially with upstream suppliers. Shein's modern slavery statement says that workers have the right to turn down overtime, they have the right to a day off a week, they aren't supposed to work for more than 60 hours a week, including overtime.
More than a dozen workers told us they labour 75 hours a week.
Don't worry, Shein told us, their suppliers pinky promise to stick to these rules. Also, the International Labour Organization says that you can't make people work overtime through threat of punishment or being fired, and you also can't make people work overtime because you've set unreasonable production quotas and you're making them stay behind to fill those. Is this something that you audit? The committee asked Shein. Yes, said Shein. So how many overtime violations were found? We don't know. The committee didn't actually ask that, frustratingly. Shein did say in its most recent stats from 2 years ago now that 37% of the pay that workers receive is from overtime work, which is a lot. I wish that we had more recent stats. I'm also curious about why we don't. And I'd love to know if Shein investigated that situation where people were working 75 hours a week. It's something they never denied after all. I suppose it's something that they don't want to engage with. They did say in their response that excessive overtime is a problem throughout the whole clothing manufacturing industry, and it's something that they are taking steps towards trying to improve. Well, let's hope so, because that is such a typically comms answer. And again, I'm worried about the impact of Trump's tariffs and the de minimis rule here, that the company might pass on the stress by making life more difficult for the workers instead of allowing American consumers and shareholders of Shein to absorb the entire hit by paying more or by accepting less profit. So the committee asked again about the initial public offering, the IPO, Shein's attempt to float on the London Stock Exchange. Shein responded, well, we're not confirming or denying, but how great would it be for the UK if we did?
I love your granddaughter. And if that's a crime, I'll stand convicted.
The news broke that Shein had had preliminary approval from the Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA, for its listing. It's not quite a done deal though. They still need to get approval from Chinese regulators. They don't have final approval here in the UK yet. And of course, I'm expecting some sort of legal challenge from Stop Uyghur Genocide. What we don't know yet is what Shein's valuation will be, and apparently the company may have gone from being this superlatively gargantuan behemoth to just being extremely large. Apparently their profits fell 40% last year, although that is something the CEO denies. It's interesting if it's true, and I wonder to what extent that is down to their reputation taking a hit. Also, with these new tariffs from Trump and the end of the de minimis rule, it looks like America might be a smaller market into the future, so that could be impacting profits as well. Apparently, the valuation may have gone down from an anticipated 66 billion to a measly 40 or even a tiny little 30 billion. I'm sure that the city could still find its way to allowing them to list on the London Stock Exchange, though, as an act of charity.
Right, you know how I said earlier that it looked like the relationship between Shein and the London Stock Exchange had gone sour? Here's the deal with that. A couple of days ago, Reuters dropped an article where it said it had spoken to sources and it had been told by 3 different people, I think, that the new plan was to try and list on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange instead, and Shein was going to ghost the UK Stock Exchange. So, here's why. Obviously, they'd been given the green light by the UK, but they had to get the permission of Chinese regulators, which they sort of thought was going to be quite an easy thing to do, just a formality. But the Chinese regulators haven't given their permission. They haven't expressly denied it, but they thought that they would have permission much sooner. So they're sort of reading the room on this one. And apparently the paperwork for the Hong Kong listing is going to be underway in the next couple of weeks, so we'll know for sure then. And if Shein doesn't end up listing on the UK Stock Exchange after all, obviously that's something that I'm not mad about. But to be honest, I am disappointed that there won't be any legal challenges here in the UK. Because I want this whole issue of modern slavery to get a good public airing. And now if they're not going ahead with that listing, or at least that listing attempt, there'll be no public, political, or especially no judicial backlash. And honestly, avoiding that backlash is probably a big factor in why China is withholding permission. That, and probably too an element of saying to the UK, stuff you for always talking down and lecturing us about human rights, there are other options out there.
Anyway, let's pop over now to Westminster and see what Parliament is saying about the Modern Slavery Act. It's an important issue, so I'm expecting those benches will be packed.
But we have to update the modern slavery legislation, not least because much of the rest of the world, ironically inspired by what we did 10 years ago, have moved to update their protections against slave labour goods. Right Honourable Lady mentioned in the United States the Uyghur Forced Labour Act, and then the due diligence directive in the EU and the forced labour regulations there.
You know what no one has talked about, and what I really want to know about, is that American legislation, and then they found out that 19% of cotton was from Xinjiang anyway, so it wasn't particularly effective. And I really want to know why not, or whether the people here think that that study was like somehow unreliable or wouldn't be relevant to the UK situation, or perhaps more likely they don't want to talk about implementation problems until they've actually got legislation over the line.
But with regards to goods that are infected with forced labour coming into the UK, the Modern Slavery Act is simply not designed for that. And we know that the workers who are exploited in places like Xinjiang are not going to find justice in their own jurisdictions. But under the Modern Slavery Act, they also can't get that justice here. And I think it's time that we say that if a company operates in the UK and is implicated in such human rights abuses within its supply chain, there should be an opening for the victims of that to seek justice in the courts in the UK. I think after the behaviour, the spectacle of the evidence that was given by Shein to the committee within this place, I think it would be unthinkable if we were to allow them to register in the stock exchange here. We are trying to rebuild the British economy, but we cannot do that at the cost of being complicit in the destruction of an entire people.
I'm sure that there are plenty of people in the City of London, and just wealthy people in general, that would say that this is a really bad idea, but then it's like, to what extent are they being guided by their vested interests?
The thing that has been mentioned by more honourable members than anything else is the transparency in supply chains and the need to go further. As I have said, that we are doing whatever we can in lieu of new legislation. In the meantime, there is nothing, I think, that I would say that is currently off the table for members of this House to work with the government on.
Nothing off the table in lieu of new legislation. Hopefully, though, that means that you're open to new legislation down the line. I will say that this lady's vibes are pretty positive, despite what she's saying being relatively wishy-washy.
With regard to that, with a special mention to the Uyghur Muslims who have been mentioned again and again in this House. There is huge... What pleases me is that, like 10 years ago, there is still huge enthusiasm in this place to push this forward, and that will only ever be rivalled by enthusiasm in the other place.
The other place is this really cute euphemism that they do when they're referring to Parliament's other half. It's very like, he who shall not be named. And they are, of course, talking about the unelected other half, the House of Lords... Oh, Voldemort! The House of Lords. Okay, let's go there now.
On the government's website development tracker, I note that the programme called Supporting Global Action to End Modern Slavery had a budget of £12.85 million and ended in 2021. The successor programme, which started in 2024 and runs to 2030, has a budget of just £1.1285 million, 10% of the predecessor programme. The aid budget has been cut overall by 40%, but the cut in the modern slavery programme has been cut by 90%. Is that correct? What is the current aid budget directed to tackling modern slavery?
Okay, I looked this up and it does seem to be true, and it makes me wonder if I'm burying the lead here, because that is a drastic drop.
Our committee recommended that the government should introduce proportionate sanctions for organisations that fail to comply with supply chain requirements. In response, the government said that it is reviewing how it can strengthen penalties. That was 3 months ago, so I wonder if my noble friend can say whether there has been any progress.
Okay, we've got another government representative here.
I will contact my noble friend Lord Hanson to put together a meeting. I think that will also help to maintain the momentum of the work in the report, to keep moving on.
A meeting. He wants to set up another meeting. I mean, maybe, hopefully lots is going on behind the scenes, but just looking in from the public perspective, it just seems agonisingly slow. It seems like there's no real movement yet.
No one would argue that this is an easy question. The global supply chains we're dealing with provide so much of what we purchase and what we take in this country, but I think we're moving in the correct direction.
This guy isn't really saying much, very similar to the other person, but her vibes were a bit better. This guy's very po-faced.
And we are keen as a committee to see much more ambitious policy on this front. I think the minister should take heart from the appetite for change from our cross-party committee, but I should also gently forewarn him that we will continue to hold government to account.
That lady is the chair of the Sparkle Report Committee. I'm right here behind you, girl. Keep it up. So turning back now at long last to the big question, is Shein using modern slavery? Or to put it another way, are its suppliers using forced labour? If I had to bet one way or the other, I'd say yes, I think they are. But while I'm at that hypothetical betting shop, I would also say that Shein will list successfully on the London Stock Exchange by the end of the year anyway. It is hard to know what is going on in Xinjiang, but that ignorance is exactly why some sort of reform is needed. We shouldn't have to wonder about the provenance of our goods and what horrible miseries we may be sponsoring abroad. Now you may be thinking, what about Western human rights abuses? Or what about those other brands that were obviously using way more Xinjiang cotton than Shein was? Or what about forced labour in Turkmenistan or Eritrea? Why pick on Shein? Isn't that a bit arbitrary? If people are genuinely interested in all that stuff, I could make more videos. But this one is already too long. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and I'll wrap things up by saying, if Parliament is going to legislate to tighten supply chains, the starting point is always going to be a bit arbitrary. It can't do everything. That is a poor excuse for doing nothing. The idea here is to set precedents so that change will be wider in the future. Set a trend, if you will. Modern slavery is out like skinny jeans, babe. This season, Westminster is doing transparency. So I, for one, will be playing my Requiem to a Sweatshop on the world's smallest violin.